Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this month's episode of the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. This month, we are tackling a tough topic, grief and loss. And while loss is nothing new to this community or any other, during the pandemic, we began to hear a lot more from those who had been widowed from a service member or veteran who were looking for support and not finding it. Too many shared frustrations and added grief from feeling like they were cut off from the military and veteran family community once their loved one had passed. But that was the community they wanted or needed support from the most during that time. Grief and loss are unfortunately relatable to many, but every loss and how an individual copes with that loss is unique, challenging, and painful. In our community, a loved one may have been killed in action, died by suicide, or the grief process may be complicated by all the jumping through the hoops of the DoD and VA processes, trying to navigate burial, death benefits, etc. And they're really not designed to support you. Grief and loss are probably some of the most universal phenomena out there, yet they are highly complex and layered, and they force us to confront feelings we may have never dreamed of and require immense vulnerability to discuss. Which is why I'm beyond grateful that our very own Ashley Craig is joining me to discuss her own journey through grief and loss. For those of you who don't know Ashley, she is our marketing development and training manager and a dear friend. Ashley, many of our listeners may already know you're a veteran spouse, but they may not know this part of your story. So I'd love to give the floor to you to share a little background on why you're talking on this topic today.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Thanks for having me back. Yes, I wanted to go a little bit more in depth about my story. It's something that over the years has become a little bit easier to talk about. So I'll jump into it. So, little background is so back in 2010, I met my daughter's father, who was also a veteran for the Air Force. He was in for a short period of time, but struggled with a lot of mental health. And unfortunately, in 2017, in August, so coming up on 8 years, we lost him to suicide. And so there was a lot of things that I know now as a trainer that I really wish that I could have helped better support him through that process. And so I've kind of, dedicated my passion to really supporting those that are struggling with mental health challenges and crisis situations.
Thank you for being here. I think this will be a really helpful topic for people to hear someone be vulnerable about, but I also love that you're our trainer on these topics, so we can also share some good information, education, and resources too. And on that note, being in this space like we are, we get to hear a lot from people about kind of their beliefs, maybe some of the misconceptions about suicide. And one we hear too often is that people really think, oh, well, it should be obvious. Like, it's obvious when someone is struggling. Anyone could be able to tell when someone might be struggling with suicidal thoughts and intervention needs to happen. But we know that's not the case. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from your own experience about what you saw as some of those warning signs, whether that was in the moment, as they were really happening, or after the fact, once you kind of could see more clearly and reflect and have time to see what's going on, because we know that might be more likely when people are realizing the reality.
Yeah, so going into identifying those warning signs, it is very difficult to identify those sometimes in the moment. I think that was the one thing that was most challenging as I got more education around suicide prevention, is that it was like there was so many warning signs that I wish I would have known,
Mhm.
right? If I had the education around suicide prevention and what to look out for or how to better get support for him. And so when we got together in 2010, I started there was some early warning signs. So there was some drinking a lot. He had a lot of risky behavior, as far as like skydiving was a huge one for
Mhm.
him. So they seeking that adrenaline. He had recently come off of a divorce. And so, he was really in a dark place. And so I think our relationship was one of the things that kind of helped him come out of that, looking for hope for a future with someone, and that lasted a good while we were together. We were together for about 7 years. And not long after, probably about a year and a half after we got together, I got pregnant with our daughter. And I decided to stay home, be a stay at home mom. I quit my job in education to be there for her. And he became the breadwinner.
Mhm.
I think that also kind of put a lot of pressure on him to be, that main source of income. He didn't really talk about his service time at all. He did not receive VA benefits. So, as a partner of a veteran, I didn't know what to ask him about his service. I wasn't with him during his service, so I was like, where do I begin, you know, asking questions, saying, like, have you talked to someone about this? What support is out there for you? And he was very reluctant to get any help from the VA or seek any mental health treatment. Because I did start to see a lot of warning signs, like the drinking didn't really stop. Um, and I didn't think it was a problem at the time until much later. Like it became a problem. Um, we moved a lot. Like he had a lot of trouble with staying in one place. So
Mhm.
there was a lot of confidence issues that I saw in him. Like he had a flight response of leaving jobs before things got tough.
Mhm.
While we were together, he probably went through 4 or 5 jobs. Um, and he just wanted change. And we moved each time. So it was challenging. But I think once my daughter came along, I think that helped a lot. I had a serious talk with him about his drinking. So he got better with, reducing his intake of alcohol. Um, and it was good for a few years. About when my daughter was about 2, they got a different job, which involved a lot of travel.
Mhm.
And that's when I saw a huge shift happen in our relationship. He was in customer service, which we know in customer service definitely takes you into more of a different role of entertaining customers and going out with them. So his drinking increased a lot. Um, and then I did find out that there was some substance misuse in there that I wasn't aware of. We didn't do it around us at the family, but he was gone from the house a lot with traveling. So me and my daughter were at home while he was out, flying around, entertaining customers, and he started distancing himself from us. He got a job offer that was in another state. So we moved out there. I lost all of my support, family support, which was pretty difficult. And I felt very isolated. So I would say that I got in depression really bad after we had moved to South Carolina. And unfortunately, like I even had a miscarriage, and that definitely took a big toll on me. And I think even on him, losing a child. Um, and so he started not being home at all. He would come home for a few days. He would spend time. He was a great father to my daughter. He would spend a lot of time with her. He was a fun dad when he came home, which was very challenging, to have parenting with someone that's
Yeah.
never there. Um, but after about a year, I was like, I need support. I need some help. I need to be close to family again. So we moved back to Texas, and I think that's when things really took a deep dive in our relationship as well as in his mental health. Um, our relationship was pretty unhealthy.
Mm,
Um, with the amount of drinking that he was doing, the traveling. He started distancing himself from us, not coming home as often. And all of a sudden, like he decided after 6 months of being home that we were going to move again. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, I can't do that for our child. Um, she was becoming the age of 4, so she was getting into preschool, and I wanted some consistency for her.
mhm,
So I had said that I wanted to stay where we were, and that was huge. I got a lot of backlash with standing up to him. I had just gotten a job, got a good promotion, and I started seeing a lot of these unhealthy conflicts happening between us, like
mhm,
the yelling and calling names, things like that. And I don't think I was in a good place in my own mental health during that time. But unfortunately, he did decide to move um, to Dallas, where me and our daughter stayed closer to the Galveston area. And it was difficult to have a relationship with someone that was hours away,
oh,
not seeing our daughter. He wasn't able to keep up with um, his promises that he would come and visit or call her.
mm,
So we started seeing that distance, right? Like really pulling away. And I think also the things that he was saying, he almost wanted me to like hate him,
mm,
you know, it was like wanted that I could do it without him. He started making some large purchases, like he bought a truck and he made sure all of that was like in his name, doing some extravagant trips. Um, and unfortunately, with his increase in drinking, he got a DUI while he was up in Dallas. And I think that's where it really took a deep dive into um, his mental health. He did still, even after getting the DUI, refuse to get some help and had to go through the whole legal process with the DUI. And it was actually the day that he lost his license that he had taken his life.
well, Ashley, I appreciate sharing so much. I mean, I've known Ashley for years, and this is the first time I'm hearing a lot of this. So I really appreciate you being here and opening up. Um, you mentioned like early on, like, there's a lot of stuff like you didn't know. I mean, there's tons I didn't know before, we professionally entered this community. Um, did you ever think that was where this was going? Like that this was something that could happen, or did this really come as a surprise to you?
Um, when he was under the influence of drinking and stuff like that, he would make comments like, "You would be better off without me."
Mm,
And that became pretty like routine. He would say that all the time. Um, I occasionally could get some of the stories of what happened during his service, but that's the only time he would talk about it. And so I didn't even know what to ask, and asked him what support he got while he was in the service. And he's like, "You just don't talk about it
mhm.
uh, when you're going through that." And so I found it really hard to reach him and be like, let's do counseling. He's like, I'd rather split up than get counseling.
Very, very reluctant, which we know is unfortunately all too common for a lot of people, but definitely we see that in our veterans in this community. Uh, that can be especially challenging for the families who are seeing all these things and, you know, looking for those lifelines. Um, I'm curious too, you mentioned some of your support and being near family. Did he have any support outside of you? Or that was supportive to you, like someone else to be able to um talk to about what you were seeing and trying to get him to seek help or anything like that? Did you have those supports?
On I didn't really talk to my family about what was going on. Of course, I was really worried about like that shame of
Mhm.
talking about how much he was drinking. or the substance misuse that I was finding out that was happening. So I did talk a little bit with his mom about what was happening, and she tried to encourage him to get help, but he really just stopped calling her as well. He wasn't super close with a lot of people in his family. It was really just his mom and his brother. He did have a rough childhood as well. So I think that was also an impact that kind of went into, his depression and um, reasons that he really needed support. And I wish he would have, I say that a lot of time. I wish I woulda, coulda, shoulda. Um, but really reached out to someone. I know he had a close friend while he was up there, and then he was seeing some of those unhealthy, warning signs as well with the drinking and the partying. Um, and eventually, he told me afterwards, it wasn't during, but afterwards he was like, well, I didn't even know y'all were still together. Like he was being unfaithful while he was up there. So that it was definitely a lot to find out in the after process. You found out, I found out a lot that was happening that I didn't know about because I wasn't there because he
Yeah.
moved. So it's really hard now that I did see that change in behavior. Like all of a sudden, like he was happier that he was up there, he was going to do what he wanted. Um, and he would start canceling trips with visiting our daughter. He was supposed to be coming down every other weekend, and he didn't. Um, and so I'm actually very grateful that I was insistent to go and see him because it had been like 3 weeks since he had seen our daughter. So I drove up to Dallas, and it was actually one of the last weekends we had, the weekend before he passed away. And she got to spend some time with him, and things were great. Like he seemed like he was in a good mindset. Um, with getting the DUI, there were certain stipulations that he wasn't allowed to drink and do things like that. So I did see a shift in his behavior. But knowing now that, that was a huge warning sign, seeing a shift in his mood and his behaviors. Um, so yeah, it was really hard to experience that. But getting into a little bit more about like what happened after, Um, I can say that was the most traumatic day of my life. Getting the phone call the night before, I did receive, some text messages from him, saying goodbye and saying that, me and our daughter would be better without him. And I tried calling him, wasn't answering his phone. Ultimately, I reached out to one of his friends up there, and we were able to have a wellness check done. And they did a wellness check, and that's when they had found him, and I got the call that he had died by suicide. Um, it was a very hard day, and a day that I still remember like it was yesterday.
I bet. I mean, I'm using this. I think you would want me to do this, right? As an opportunity to say, well, good that you knew to even that wellness checks were a thing, right? If you don't know that, everyone listening, like if you're worried about someone and you're not able to check on them, um, get someone to do. There are professional people who will do a wellness check. Um, I don't know. Do you know much about that process? Like, um,
Um, So all you do is you're not gonna call 911, you'll just call like a local sheriff's office or police station and ask if it's possible that they can do a wellness check. You are concerned about someone with their mental health, and you think that there can be a potential that they are in danger um, of hurting themselves, and they'll send out a sheriff or constable to the residence and check on the person. I would encourage, if you are concerned, sending that person out because you never know what you're going to find, and you definitely don't want to be the one that finds that. It can be pretty traumatic. So I'm glad that
That wasn't
they
you.
were the ones that discovered that versus, another friend or family member.
That's a really good point too, is it creates some of that distance and separation for you and for them. Like even if, they are okay, they're not in a good place. That's why you're doing it. And it might be, I don't know that receptive is the right word, but that could help that it's an external person, intervening in that moment. So you mentioned a little about his family. And I know from us talking and just from what right, grief is very individualized. And if you get nothing else from this, conversation, I hope people understand that, right? The way that I grieve is not the way that Ashley grieves, is not the way that, somebody else grieves. And I may grieve one way for one loss and a different way for a different loss. Um, and so we can't read each other's minds on that. We're surrounded by other people who are also grieving the loss in their own way, and that can be really complicated. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your experience and how um what happens next, like for you, and how that journey was. At that point, you're also a mom, and you're also having others in your life, trying to support or not, or grieving the loss, and I'm sure it was complicated. So what would you like to kind of share with us about what happened afterwards and how that experience was for you?
Yeah, I could say the afterwards was the most challenging part, which was, losing someone we cared about very much. I want to say I was very thankful that in the area that he passed away, they did have a county loss team. So this is a team that comes out and calls you if you lose someone to suicide, and they provide you resources. They check in on you for like a
Yeah.
few weeks. They do follow ups with you. So I think that was really great. Um, we went to the loss team facility when we went up there, and we got to talk to other families that had recently lost loved ones to suicide as well. And one of the questions that they asked me, they're like, thinking about losing someone, to suicide, how do you feel like this is going to impact you? And I had mentioned, like, I want to see how I can take this traumatic event and turn it around and educate others um, about like how to support someone that was going through crisis, and felt like I should have done more at that point. And I started feeling a lot of that guilt and shame about what I should have done, and how I could have helped, what I noticed. Um, you don't see it until afterwards. You're like, man, there were so many warning signs that I should have noticed. I should have insisted he got help, right? And you can, that saying, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. That's
Yep.
like with anyone that's struggling with mental health, right? You can encourage, you can provide the information to get help, but that doesn't mean that they're going to. Um, I had a different stage of grief than some of his family members. I became a single mom in a one income family, so that was a huge shift. We didn't really talk about benefits that he had left over. Like we didn't have those conversations, which now like it's so important to know like, hey, what is the benefits out there? What are those retirement funds? Like how can I get support and financial support after you lose someone to suicide? So I did reach out to the VA and try to file claims with, because he was diagnosed with PTSD, and see if we can get some support through there. But unfortunately, that was a very difficult process. Getting an advocate to request records and try to determine if it was service connected, right, to his mental health. But unfortunately, there wasn't the documentation while he was in service to connect him to being a service connected death. So we weren't able to get any of those benefits. So it's really hard to prove that. And then I think the hardest part was the grief between his was losing a child and mine was losing a partner. We were at two different stages of grief during this time. And so that saying, hurt people, is so true. I think that made my journey a little bit more difficult instead of coming together. Like I was at the anger stage for a long time. I was upset about it that he had left his daughter and left us. And his mom had lost a child. And at the time, I couldn't really understand that. Um, and you kind of like turn off those emotions. The first thing I did was like, I'm going to get some help for my daughter and myself. So I checked all those boxes. Like I went to counseling, I went to grief share, but I never felt like those were the most appropriate places for me. Like I had a lot of shame behind telling someone I lost someone to suicide, and then guilt, like that I was responsible. I should have done more. I should have called that night. There's just lots of things that I still struggle with even to this day, that maybe trigger a lot of memories from that traumatic event. And I wish I had a community, because he didn't reach out to the VA, so I wasn't connected to a military community to talk to other people that had maybe experienced similar situations with their veterans. And I didn't have that community, not until much later, that I found that community here, with the Veterans House Network, to share my story. And that helped tremendously because I was like, man, I'm not the only one that dealt with this. Like, it helped me feel like, like I wasn't crazy, that, someone else had experienced many things that he had shown during our relationship. But, even checking all those boxes, I got counseling for myself, for my daughter. I didn't process that grief. I made sure I did everything I was supposed to do. I put her in counseling. I made sure I educated her and remembered him on birthdays and anniversaries. But at a certain point, it started getting very difficult to celebrate those. I was reminding my daughter was 4 years old when he passed. It was actually 2 weeks before her birthday. I felt like I was reminding her of a traumatic event of losing her father so close to her birthday. So we would just still talk stories about him and show pictures. But his mom, I think, struggled the most with it, with the guilt. She's like, I don't feel like, he should have called me. And I think it took a lot of healing for her. So encouraging her to seek mental health was really important. And I even stressed it so that she could be and have a healthy relationship with her granddaughter and not put her grief onto, the child, on my daughter. And that's still something we work with today.
Man, so I mean, not everyone gets to know Ashley like we know Ashley, but everything that you're talking about, the going into mom mode, the checklists, like we still see that. You're the caretaker even of our team. Um, so you said, like, yeah, you were checking the boxes, but you weren't really checking in with you. So how, like, when did that process happen for you, and how did that ultimately impact like your mental health and what you did for yourself to work through that once you realized you maybe hadn't so much?
Yeah, so I had thrown myself into work, um, working nonstop. I did feel like even distance, like my relationship with my daughter changed. I was more protective, but I wasn't there. Like I wasn't living life, like emotionally. I was emotionally numbing through work and avoiding just talking about it. I was like, I just need to keep going. Like, I don't have a chance to grieve. My daughter needs me. I'm her only parent. And it made it difficult to allow myself to grieve. It wasn't until I met my neighbor, which was about a year and a half later, that lived next door to me, and he was a veteran.
Mhm.
And we started talking. Told him about my experience with my daughter's father and what we were going through, and he kind of helped normalize a lot of the things that I was going through. And that was a real eye-opening moment that like I could connect to a community that understood what it was like losing a veteran to suicide and what it was like living with someone with PTSD.
Well, and yeah, so that was your first, connection to the community. And then also those who don't know, I mean, she alluded to it, but Ashley first came to us as a participant. So I'm curious, how long after that did you finally get connected to other spouses?
So my neighbor, which is now also my husband, um, because he was that support for me, right? He kind of helped me through this. He really encouraged me to go back to counseling, and said that, you need to process it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did. I went back to counseling and I actually worked on myself. I did the EMDR treatment, which was very helpful. I really was able to process a lot of that grief. And then still to this day, like I still do counseling if I struggle um, with my mental health. So after I got with my husband, my boyfriend at the time, I started seeing that there was a need to get connected to the military community. When we got together, he was very upfront about his health, his, struggle with PTSD. He wanted me to know like all the benefits with the VA and encouraged me to talk to others. And so I think we finally moved in together. I think it was about 2 years after we had gotten together and got married that I didn't want the same thing to happen in this relationship. I wanted to be prepared and understand what it was like living and loving a veteran. So I reached out through counseling. It was my counselor that was a leader for the Veteran Spouse Network. And she's like, you should really check out, the peer support groups. It's great, it's impactful. It'll really help you understand other spouses and partners and what their journeys are and how to help your veteran, but also help yourself, right? Sharing your story is a part of processing trauma. And it wasn't later on that I understood that.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about it a lot. It was very difficult. It was very triggering to talk about the story of losing someone to suicide because of that stigma that you have. But sharing that story is honestly what helped
Mhm.
to others. I started reaching out to other organizations and people that had lost loved ones to suicide, and I started becoming that support system for them as well.
Yeah.
Like I'd be like, do you want someone to talk to? And I wanted to normalize like where they were going through and help them through their journey. So like I'm like, hey, did you get out of bed today? And they're like, yeah. I was like, hey, then you're surviving, right? Letting them know that it's a hard journey, but it takes time to process their grief and get through this. And they would ask, what I did with filing claims, and I talk to them about that, or Social Security, or 401k, like just what I had to do.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was giving back to the community that have lost loved ones to suicide. So that was a huge um, thing that kind of like helped me through my grief was sharing my story and helping others.
Yeah, and for any of our listeners who don't know, Ashley leads all of our training related to suicide prevention that we're doing quite a bit of now. Um, so did you feel like that was just like a natural extension of like trying to find those ways to give back? And then like what does that give you being able to equip people with the skills that maybe you feel like you didn't have back then and you could have benefited from?
Um, I love helping others identify what those warning signs are. Like, I want someone else to understand what it looks like so that it can save a life.
Mhm.
Like the things that I wish I would have known, maybe it would have made a difference, but I'll never know, right? But telling people that, these are the things to look out for, and that understanding where you are in your own mental health journey can impact you seeing those warning signs. So share it with friends and family. Let them know what the warning signs are if you're concerned, so that they can be on the lookout and it's not just you. Because sometimes that can be difficult, especially if you do have a, unhealthy relationship, and you're going through your own mental health challenges, that you share with them that, hey, this is what to look out for. Um, Here's the ways to get help. Maybe, find that support system. Finding a support system, I think, is huge, so that you're not that one all be all for your loved one that may be struggling with suicidality.
Yeah, and that's something as we've delved into offering more suicide prevention training, lethal means, kind of exploring what really is supporting or what best equips people to identify and intervene. This is stuff that just if you're wondering, would I really benefit from that? I don't really have anyone in my life struggling. Like you may not know. We went to, I don't think I even told Ashley this. We were at a suicide prevention conference last week, and they had this really cool comedy troupe, called One Degree of Separation, where they bring comedians on to talk about struggling with depression and suicidality in a very raw, format. And the guy who created it said he called it 1 degree of separation because you've heard like 6 degrees of separation, where like if you don't know somebody who's X, you know somebody who knows somebody. And he was like, that's not true with mental health and suicide. You know somebody. You know somebody who's struggling. You may not know that they're struggling, but you know somebody who's struggling. So, and I thought that was really spot on, right? Like, stigma is getting reduced, but it's still so prevalent and we still bury so much of this. So equip yourselves, right? Like equip yourselves with the knowledge, the tools, um, to be able to better see when something's going on and know what to do because we say this sometimes, and Ashley can probably speak to this better of like, it's hard to be wrong with supporting someone, right? Like wrong is not trying. Um, but I was curious, Ashley, on that note, I think, because, someone may say, oh, this isn't, they may still be trying to figure out, is this relevant to me? And it is. The answer is yes, it is. Whoever you are, whatever situation you're in, it's relevant to you. Um, So whether it's supporting someone who is struggling with suicidality or supporting someone who has lost a survivor of someone of a loss, what would you say are like the best things? And knowing that it is personal, individualized, what are some of the things that are most supportive, and what are the things that maybe you experienced that weren't so supportive that maybe we should just steer clear of?
Yeah, so let's go into the things that weren't supportive. I think the biggest thing for me, is I constantly got asked, "Are you okay?"
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Well, I mean, do you want me to be honest?"
No.
Right? Everybody says that word fine, right? Like, I'm doing fine.
Mhm.
And we know fine does not mean that they're doing good.
No.
Um, so asking more, right? Asking open-ended questions. is important, Ask them if they talk to anybody they trust about, their mental health journey. If they would like to seek help, or maybe find some way for them to use some self-help skills like getting into a hobby or reconnecting with friends. But if you start seeing someone distancing themselves from you, maybe they're not replying to text. Maybe they're not coming to, outings with you anymore. Maybe they're isolating, you know, and you don't see them, commenting or being themselves anymore, like when you're out. Even just hygiene, right? Like just see
Yeah.
that it's different. And you're like, man, they don't look good. Like something's going on. Ask. I mean, a lot of times, people that are struggling with suicidal thoughts and behaviors are suffering in silence, right? It's happening no matter if you ask or not.
Right.
Um, and so ask them more about what's going on, you know, using that I statements like, I'm concerned about you. Like, I'm starting to notice this. I think that really changes that perspective for someone. Like, people do care about you and they want you to be okay. They want you to seek help. So, I mean, I've learned like to just ask,
Mhm.
right? And if you are truly concerned, practice, asking someone, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? It's okay to ask. You're not going to plant that idea. There's so many, misconceptions around asking the questions like, man, I'm going to make them think about it. No, if you're not asking, that doesn't mean they're not thinking about that, right? Sometimes it lets it come to light. Um, it brings it to the forefront, gives them the opportunity to share, you know what? Yeah, I have been thinking about that. I've been thinking, not waking up the next day. And everybody would be better off without me. You never know what they're going to say. So prepare yourself, right? For when they do say, and be supportive. Be like, you're not alone in this journey, and I'm here to support you. Um, I
Yeah,
think that was,
that's
huh?
no judgment, I think, is huge.
Yeah, the no judgment is huge, right? Letting them just share, and not problem solve,
Mhm.
right? I think that's the biggest thing when, you're talking to someone and you're checking in on them, is you're trying to problem solve and fix their problems. And that's not going to help them because they're not always going to be there. So giving them the tools, to help themselves and to be there to work together to come up with a solution. It has more buy-in for that person that's struggling, that, when the next time you're not there, that they can know how to reach out for that support.
Right, because no one can be the only lifeline. That's not helpful to the person that's struggling, and it's certainly not helpful to the person who's the only lifeline. And that's something too important to remember. If you feel like you're in that position, like you gotta you gotta look out for you too. Because it's great to it's important to know these skills, um and feel confident in them, but when you're using them, and especially if you're using them with someone in your life that you love, that's hard, on the individual who loves them. So taking care of yourself too. And so we've kind of been talking loosely about some of these resources that are out there, but what are resources that you want to make sure people know about, whether that's they're trying to become more educated to be able to notice warning signs and know what to do, or if they have lost someone to suicide, how they can support themselves? What's good that they should tap into?
So I would say the best training that I've received, and now I'm a trainer in,
Yeah.
is the mental health first aid.
Mhm.
I love that it is digestible language. It's easy tools that you can use. You talk about those warning signs. You talk about how to talk to someone that you're concerned about, what to look out for. What are those early warning signs, right? And then when does it become a crisis situation? So it really breaks it down to be able to approach someone and to assess the situation. Like, I really think they need to get some help. Um, how can I better support them? So I really love how that training breaks it down for you and easy to, you know, follow this action plan and know that you're supporting someone. And then the other thing would be um, it's really just education, you know, with learning about what supports are in your area.
Mhm.
Um, your local mental health authority is great. So that would be like our first one. But I know for the military and veteran community, TAPS is another one. So they reach out and they have peer support groups because normal grief support, talking about that postvention, um, you don't always feel like you fit in,
Mhm.
when you're a normal group. So talking to someone that has lost another person to suicide is helpful, right? It makes you understand your journey and where you are. And I think the more I talk about my story, the more that I get to process the grief around my own loss. And don't be afraid to ask for help. I would say that's my big takeaway from today. And I hope all of y'all, that's listening knows that someone close to you may need help.
Someone close to you may need help. Don't be afraid to talk to them. Don't be afraid to equip yourself. I mean, I would say too, there's, especially as we've gotten more in this space, there is a lot out there. There are, especially in suicide prevention community generally, but even within the military veteran community, there are a lot of training. So yeah, we're big proponents of mental health first aid because we've actually explored so many of these. Um, and I personally don't think you can have too much suicide prevention training. So if you're curious, take different ones. I think they have a lot of common threads between them. So don't feel like you need to take 25 suicide prevention trainings to become equipped, but try different things to find the one you like. Um, and don't try not to get overwhelmed by how much is out there because there is good stuff out there. We found mental health first aid to be very, very approachable and tangible. So that's the one we really like. But there's a lot of good stuff. So check it out if more than anything. Yeah, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's a
Yeah,
scary topic though, right? It
it
is.
is very scary topic. And I would say share what you learn.
Hear what you learn.
If anything, share with someone else. Be like, hey, I found this training very helpful. I think it would be great, to reach out. And it's not just our adults in our lives that we need to look out for. It's our little ones too, right? And that's huge. So, we do teach, even youth mental health first aid, which is adults, supporting a youth struggling. So I would say, figure out how you can help save someone's life by just asking a question.
That's all it takes sometimes, and that's so powerful. And that's why I'm super grateful, Ashley, that you are on our team and helping us do this work to equip people with these skills and create spaces where they can talk with peers about their experiences and those, judgment-free safe spaces. Um, that's critical because it's a very unique situation, whether you're in this military veteran community or not. And there is still so much, I hate saying the word stigma over and over again, but there is still so much discomfort or whatever. People don't know how to talk about it or react to it or support people. And so just get out of that, like that's what we want to encourage people to do is become educated, become equipped, and talk about it. Your story is your own, and I'm so grateful, Ashley, that you came on and were willing to share your story with all of our listeners. I know that will be so impactful. Um, so I'm just really grateful for you being on our team and doing the work that you do, but also, being a part of this community and being willing to support others through sharing your story. So thank you so much for being on here and talking through this with us today. I appreciate you. I know our listeners appreciate you, and we'll learn a lot from today. I just wanted to kind of, if there's anything else you wanted to leave with, I think we've done a lot of good, wrap ups and important, but anything else you want to just share with people before we close out today?
No, I want to thank you, Hannah, for allowing me to share my story. And I hope that this does, touch someone else, and makes them think, hey, maybe I am concerned about a loved one. What can I do to better support them? Um, and we're here, the Veteran Spouse Network, we're here to listen. We don't support just spouses, we support the family members. And if you want some support, reach out to us. We're here to listen. And if you want to talk specifically to me, definitely email us and I'll reach out. I'll be happy to support you as well. Like, you're not alone in this journey. And that's what I love about the Veteran Spouse Network, is that we are a community and we're here to listen.
Perfectly said. Well, thank you, Ashley, and thank you guys for listening. We will see you next month. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.